Hello, everyone. My name is Rashika Paranla, and I am the founder and director of Spacetime Archives, which is an educational outreach nonprofit that aims to provide unique STEM learning opportunities and resources to underserved youth. Spacetime Archives runs a project called And Then There Was 10, the testimonials of 10 women fighting for educational equity in STEM fields, an interview series highlighting the journeys of 10 extraordinary women who are at the forefront of STEM education, research, and just overall equity and diversity in STEM. On that note, let me introduce one of our interviewees, Dr. Marina Parker. Marina Parker is a lead systems engineering architect at AMA, or Analytical Mechanics Associates, and she specializes in supporting NASA's human research program's exploration medical capabilities. She holds a PhD in systems engineering and has a background in hyperspectral imaging applications in microscopy. Currently, Marina leads Earth-independent medical operations for future Mars missions, and she's very passionate about human space exploration, mentorship, and community contribution. I actually first met Dr. Parker when she was the subject matter expert that I was working under in the NASA High School Aerospace Scholars Moonshot program. So I'm so excited to have Dr. Parker on our interview series here today, and I'll have her introduce herself further.
Absolutely. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me on. And yes, absolutely. As you mentioned, I currently am leading the Earth Independent Medical Operations project under EXMC's it's the EXMC element, which is under the HRP program, the Human Research Program. So I feel very privileged to be able to be the technical lead for this project. We're paving the way for incredible new things for putting humans on Mars. And I'm happy to be here to share some of my journey and answer your questions.
Of course, we're so excited here. So, a little background for the viewers about these questions. They were submitted nationwide from students that participate in Spacetime Archives programs. And one of our most asked questions when we reached out was, can you share with us your journey into STEM fields, particularly what motivated you to specialize in systems engineering, especially within the context of space exploration?
Absolutely. So I think, for me, it was a little bit different. I didn't always strive to be in systems engineering. I knew I wanted to do engineering from a very, very young age. I've always been interested in how do things work together. If you take it all apart, what's really in there? And then as I, grew older from the little child who's fascinated by putting things together and taking them apart, I just became more and more fascinated with space. The idea of discovering the unknown, discovering things that are not within easy reach. And I think more specifically on the NASA side, I've always been fascinated with the fact that many of the things that NASA employees or leads work on, oftentimes there are things that are so far into the future that you might not necessarily get a payoff on the return, I guess, of an investment, right? And I've always admired the passion and dedication that someone might have in order to be able to work on a project or help lead something that they may not even see that return on their investment in their lifetime, but it is for the future, and for making sure that knowledge is available to all. I did my undergraduate and my master's in mechanical engineering, and I actually stumbled upon systems engineering by pure accident. So I had not a clue in my mind what systems engineering even was. And life happens and it leads you to different kinds of directions. And I found myself in Mobile, Alabama, and I was kind of limited to living in that town for now. And so I couldn't really quite find a job that I was passionate about, that aligned with my skill set in that area. And so I thought, well, can't just sit around and do nothing. So I went down to University of South Alabama to see what engineering programs they had available for PhDs, and systems engineering was one of them. And I remember very vividly picking up a book and thinking, oh my gosh, there are no equations in this book. What am I doing here? Because as a mechanical engineer, we're working on mechanical systems, right? We're used to, fluid mechanics equations, thermodynamics things, right? dynamics of system, vibrations, all of these things that I need to solve equations. And then all of a sudden, I pick up the systems engineering book and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know if this is for me. And so I had the privilege of sitting down with the director of that program and talked about, what is systems engineering, which just completely opened my eyes to this much bigger world where now it allows me to, rather than just being responsible for a tiny little piece on a mechanical subsystem that's going to be a much bigger thing. I got the opportunity to, take part in having that high level view, seeing how everything comes together, which, coming back full circle, as a child, I've just always, been fascinated by that. Okay, I see that this little part connects to here, but what does it need for everything to come together? So that is how kind of my systems engineering and love my space came. I think I've always had a love for space, and then life just led me to stumble upon systems engineering, and that's how I got here.
Think a lot of kids, especially my age, share that curiosity that you had for finding out how things worked. And it's really inspiring to see your journey through not just your work with NASA, but your education through your PhD. And I'm sure our viewers would be really interested in hearing more about it. So,
Yeah.
building off of your journey through this field, throughout your academic and professional experiences, have you encountered any specific barriers or challenges being a woman in STEM? And if so, how did you overcome them? And what advice would you give to other young girls or maybe students, girls in college or their PhD programs that are facing similar obstacles?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly, it's no secret that as women, many times we find ourselves at a disadvantage in one way or another, whether it's having to repeat yourself a little bit louder so that your voice is heard in the room. There have been those instances where you say something and then a male colleague says the same exact thing, and all of a sudden a light bulb comes on for someone else because they heard it from, a male colleague. Or just the generalized idea that, I think to this day, I get comments like, "Oh my gosh, as a woman, it's really amazing that you're doing that." And it's like, I hope that one day we'll get away from "as a woman," right? It's just awesome that any individual is doing things like that. So I think as a younger person and early on in my career, it was definitely harder to navigate. It was harder to understand, harder to feel like you have to somewhat maybe overcompensate, right? Might have to work twice as hard or prove yourself even more. But I think there was a time in my life where I realized that other people's opinions and views are not a true reflection of my abilities. And I think that lessened the burden of, or what I felt was a burden of being a woman in STEM. I became to almost feel sorry for the other individuals that thought that way because, well, the reality is they're going to be limiting themselves, right? They're not going to be listening to subject matter experts out there, and really have to and really hear what they have to say, if they're women, if that's how they feel about it. And we all know that diversity and inclusion is a huge part of having successful teams. And so already you're eliminating such a large crowd from your thinking, your approaches, your insight. And so I think I started to feel sorry for them, which then in turn helped me maybe break down my own barriers or my own walls of just being defensive about it or feeling that I had to prove myself, and just accepting that sometimes you just have to be okay knowing that someone isn't going to change and it's not your job to change them.
Mhm.
Um, it helped me a lot to know that when I did cross paths with people who had challenges with me as a woman in the field, to either look at the situation and determine, all right, this is temporary. I just need to get to that next chapter, that next goal. And assess, like, is this something can I do about it? Is there anything I can do about it right now? If I could, then I would change the situation. So, in during my time as a PhD student, when I started to experience things like that, It was kind of what I would say a little bit too late in the journey to say, you know what, I'm going to start over. So I think it just needed a little bit of extra resilience and toughness on my end to just say, you know what, I am going to choose to block this out and just finish this chapter because I was just so close. Had I caught onto it earlier on in my journey, I probably would have chosen to switch, to a different lab or a different research endeavor. But yeah, so you just ask yourself, hey, can I remove myself from the situation? And oftentimes it's not easy to do so. And so if you can't, you just have to understand that what someone chooses to believe of you based on whatever barriers they have in their own mind is not a true reflection. It's not an accurate reflection of your abilities and who you are and what you can do. And sometimes that's easier said than done. So I think also it really helps having a group of people around you, surrounding yourself with a really good support system that's always lifting you up and reminding you that you've you don't just belong there, but you have earned your place, that you are, in fact, capable, which I think we all know on some level, but I'm sure many people deal with imposter syndrome, and it is very easy to wonder, do I really belong in whatever, endeavor you're in? And so it's really helped me a lot to just give grace to others and just say, you know what, it's not my job to change their mind. All I can do is be a decent human being, do my job to the best of my ability, and then take myself out of the situation if I can. Um, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for those insights. I know there are a lot of young girls, whether they're in STEM or any other field, that feel patronized, especially when you're going into academia for the first time. I use this example a lot because it was something that was really powerful for me. Because when I was in high school and I would be taking physics classes like AP Physics 1 or AP Physics 2, our school intentionally makes it so that there's an equal gender ratio. In high school, I always felt like I was in a sort of bubble. I never really realized how how segregated STEM was actually in the real world. And it has gotten better. I'm sure like throughout the years, decades, I'm sure it has gotten better for women in STEM. But I remember I went to my first research conference and I was fully expecting it to be exactly like my high school physics class, where like equal number of girls and boys, I could talk with at the same volume that my male counterpart could. But I remember seeing the list of keynote speakers for that conference, and it was entirely white men. And I think that was that was my first instance where I was like, wow, this is not like how I thought it would be.
Yeah, it's the more you go out into the real world, I think it's even more eye-opening. And one thing that was I guess interesting for me is many times I thought, well, surely at some level you get educated enough that you don't have that mindset anymore, right? So I for a while I had a really hard time wondering how all these brilliant minds could also be whatever. Yeah, I don't want to use the word dumb, but could just be so the complete opposite of that on an issue like this. And I think one thing that I keep going back to is a lot of times we grow up believing in something. And I think if we look at our world, society, we all come from different cultures. I know for me, I grew up in Egypt and I came to the US when I was 13. And so there were a lot of customs that I grew up with that to me seemed normal. A lot of things that I ate that to me seemed normal and I enjoyed. And I remember introducing my friends to some of these customs or some of the foods that I ate. And then they were just in shock like, how is this normal for you? Right. And that was really eye opening to me because not necessarily that what I was eating was bad or my customs were bad, but just eye opening in the sense of, wow, what seems normal to me isn't going to be always normal to someone else. And when you grow up with something that is, you know, your parents have embedded in you that it's not normal, that it's a taboo, that it's, less than acceptable, at times, unfortunately, I think don't, you just grow up in that, and it's hard to pull away from it. It's hard for them to wrap their minds around a woman being able to lead. So, all you can do is try to lead by example, and not, a lot of times we say things like, I want to show other women that you can, but I think it's important to also equally show other women, other men that you can. I think there's benefit to showing men that we are capable, and also showing women that you are capable of being capable. Um, I think I was one of, gosh, certainly a handful of women who graduated with our masters in engineering. Certainly, my bachelor's degree wasn't a whole lot better. So, we certainly need more women to make that happen. So, I would definitely encourage people to not shy away from it. Yep, you're going to have to fight and kick at some point along the way. But I think also equally as important is to highlight all the people who do welcome women in STEM and rally for us and want us to be there. So a good example of that is your high school, right? Trying to provide that environment where you didn't feel like it was not normal to have women in an AP physics class.
Yeah, definitely. I love some of the points that you touched on because I feel like that was one of my intentions while building this interview series. I was pretty strategic in trying to get interviewees from all across the board. I talked to statisticians that look at demographic analysis over time, especially in academia, and scientists like yourself that have experienced some of the obstacles of being a woman in STEM. So I'm just really grateful to be able to hear your insights. Shifting
Thank you. I'm
gears,
grateful to be here. Thank you.
you. Shifting gears a little bit to some of your projects for NASA, we had a
Yeah,
lot of students that were really eager to hear about your Earth Independent Medical Operations projects for future Mars missions. What are the primary challenges that you face in ensuring the health and well-being of these astronauts on extended missions?
absolutely. Yeah, that's a wonderful question. It's a question that I don't know if I quite have a straight answer to because it's extremely complex, but I would say the biggest challenge is not having data. So when you think of extended missions, so it's one thing to be able to go to ISS or even the moon and come back, and you do these short duration missions, and you have there's a term that we used, um, RTDC, return to definitive care. So when we think of astronauts' health, if something goes wrong, you have the ability to return to definitive care. So definitive care is when we refer to, where could you have access to what would be equivalent to almost like a full hospital, right? Um, so if you're on ISS, it's easy. You can evacuate back to Earth. On the moon, I think the longest is roughly 3 days, depending on the orbit, but you can still evacuate within a matter of 3 days. But um, when we start thinking about Mars, you can't really evacuate to get help when it's going to take you, 9 months to get back to Earth. So how do we address being prepared for a wide range, a huge spectrum of all the potential things that could go wrong. But how do you prepare for it when you don't even really know all of the things that can go wrong? So, a huge challenge in this is trying to prepare for what you don't know. Um, we're very lucky in our progression with ISS and all the SDS missions that we have some data, and we've been able to mitigate a lot of the health risks in space. Kidney stones used to be a really huge health risk, and for a while that was an unmitigated risk, and we were able to mitigate that. But you can only plan so much, and there are just things that you won't know until they happen. So what do you do then? I think that is the biggest challenge, is trying to predict what you don't know could happen.
Definitely. I also wanted to ask you about one of your other projects that you noted in your bio, your development of the LED-based excitation scanning light source system. So,
Wow.
can you tell us a little bit about how you proceeded through this project? Any big takeaways, anything that maybe informed some of your later research?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for this particular project, so this was funded by the National Science Foundation. And when it comes to imaging and microscopy, there's always a battle between high speed and especially when it comes to live cell imaging, because, you know, the interaction in cells, especially on a molecular level, um, can happen extremely fast. So you need to be able to measure signals really, really fast. But it's great if you can measure signal fast, but if you can't understand the signal because it's all kind of jumbled and not readable, then measuring at fast speeds is not really that great. So then you try to think, well, okay, can I measure at slower speeds? Well, is slow going to be too slow to measure the interaction, right? And so it's always this, battle going back between, the resolution, the speed of something. And so the lab that I worked with developed what's called hyperspectral imaging excitation scanning, which generally when traditional type of imaging you where you take data from emission scanning. And so this allowed us to propose this new idea of, well, let's be able to collect all of the data that comes back from excitation scanning, be able to so you excite the cell and then you're able to measure all of the emitted data, so then you have a stronger signal, and then with stronger signal then you can afford to measure at greater speeds. And so part of that is also cost. And so LEDs, so if you look at the cost of LEDs versus using a laser, the cost of LEDs is a lot more reasonable than having a laser. And so our lab, we worked together to create this novel system of, well, let's figure out if we can select a subset of LEDs to cover a specific wavelength on the spectrum and see if we can get that light source. If we can couple it to a microscope, we can certainly image fast enough, because we're talking about now from seconds to microseconds speed in imaging.
Mm-hmm.
And then we did a lot of theoretical optimization to the system to see what is the best output in terms of power from the LEDs that we can get into that system. And so that's how that kind of project came together. Some of the biggest challenges were realizing just how much that just because you simulate something, it doesn't mean it's going to work that way when you integrate it all together. And that was really, really eye opening. And also, another eye opening thing was just how limited you are by the existing technologies around you. And so, our system could only be as good as the available LEDs on the market. So even though we addressed the issue of speed and we went from seconds to microseconds and wavelength switching, but the power of the LEDs and the cone of the light coming out of the LED was still completely restricted by the manufacturers of LEDs. So it was also really eye-opening to know that you could have the latest and greatest thing, but it's going to be limited by what is available on the market. And sometimes that meant that you have to think outside of the box to try to make your idea happen and come to life.
It's really inspiring how versatile your interests are because you just detailed two research projects, but you're also, beyond all of your professional endeavors, you're also passionate about mentorship, especially with NASA. So, what inspired you to become a subject matter expert for NASA's HAWS program and motivate high school students on lunar base design and systems engineering?
So I'll say this is a two-part question. I'll start with part one, which is about the mentoring piece. So throughout my life, I have felt that there are many times where it was easy, at least for me, to think me, or wonder why couldn't I do this, or why don't I have X, Y, Z? And I don't know, there's something about um, I found myself finding a lot of joy and being able to help other people. And the less I focused on what I had or why didn't I achieve XYZ, and more on focusing helping other people achieve their dreams, there was a kind of joy that just came to me that I didn't really know was even possible. And so it was really eye opening what happens when you start worrying less about how accomplished you're going to be and more about how you can give back to others along the way. And I think that truly helped me be the person that I am today. I think the more I put myself out there to help other people, and not just in mentoring, but just something as simple as friends, people who are not even in the STEM field, but just being a kind person and just being there for other people just gave me a kind of happiness that I didn't know. It just fueled me. It kept me going to see that, a simple hello or a simple assistance with just the smallest thing could change someone's day or world or life. And so I just, yeah, I always wanted to make whatever I do in life to somehow be able to give back, whether it's to the community or to that one-off chance that you meet someone and a simple act of kindness could change their day. And then I thought about also myself and being here, and kind of going back to the comment earlier saying that as much as there are people who make it challenging for women to be in STEM, there are so many people that are the reason that I am here today, and I would not have done it without them. All the way from mentors to friends who have been supportive to family. And so I wanted to be able to give some of that back and, tell or show students just that, it's not all rainbows and butterflies, and that's okay. It's okay. And you just have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. That is how you're going to make it. A lot of times it's really easy to look on social media or on the published profiles of someone who's successful, and it always highlights, right, all the amazing accomplishments that they did. And of course they are, but it's very rare that you get insight into the struggles and all of the things that they had to overcome to actually get there. So I wanted to put myself in a position to where if that was ever something anyone wondered about, what does it actually take to get here? What's the day in the life actually look like, to be able to have the opportunity to share that with people?
Well, that's really sweet to hear, especially as a student that's planning to go into engineering or go into physics. So we are nearing the end of our interview time. So I just wanted to ask a general question about human space exploration. What excites you the most about the future of NASA and NASA's projects, particularly in terms of the people involved, the projects involved?
So I really, really love, I'm sure you've already heard the we are going.
Mhm.
We're going to the moon, we are going to go to Mars, we have our Moon to Mars program. This idea of this idea of inclusivity for all. If there's anything that I've loved about STEM, about exploration, is that knowledge does not discriminate. Knowledge is for everyone, and knowledge is, facts are always the facts, and we're scientists. We love our facts. So facts are facts no matter who you are, no matter who's looking at them. And so I love that NASA's new mission is we. I'm excited to see what the Artemis crew is doing, to know that we are about to have our first woman on the moon, our first person of color on the moon, is just absolutely incredible to see how far we've come. And yes, we still have a long way to go, but to see a place like NASA, who's at the forefront of this initiative, who so many people like myself look up to, and to see them setting that kind of example, I'm extremely excited about it. And I'm extremely excited about us showing that while things are going to continue to be challenging, that's not going to scare us. We are comfortable with being uncomfortable, and we will make this happen. We're going to the moon, and we're going to go to Mars.